We are stepping onto a narrow cobblestone street in Nantucket or New Bedford, sometime in the middle years of the 19th century. The air carries the faint scent of salt and tar, of wood smoke and drying fish. This is a town that lives by the sea, and by the long absences the sea demands. Tonight we will linger with the women who remained behind, the wives of whalemen whose voyages could stretch to 3 years, 4, sometimes longer, and who, far too often, never came home at all. If you are ready to drift into that patient, waiting world, simply allow yourself to settle deeper. And come with me. Imagine yourself waking in a small, neat house on a quiet lane just back from the harbor. The year might be 1848 or 1853. The exact date hardly matters, for the days here have a way of repeating themselves like the slow rise and fall of the tide. You open your eyes in the half-light before dawn. The bed beside you has been empty for 21 months already. You lie still for a moment, listening to the familiar creak of the house settling, the muffled sound of the sea a few streets away. Then you rise. Pull yesterday's dress over your shift. Tie your hair with the same plain ribbon you have worn since you left. Downstairs, the kitchen is cold. You kneel to rake last night's ashes. Lay a handful of kindling and a precious lump of coal saved from last winter. The fire catches slowly. You set the kettle on its hook and measure out tea leaves that must last another month. While the water heats, you cut yesterday's bread very thin. Spread it with a scraping of salt butter for the children. There are 3 of them asleep upstairs, perhaps 4. The youngest still small enough to believe his father is simply away on a very long fishing trip. When the first pale light touches the windows, you wrap your wool shawl around your shoulders. The same faded shawl that has kept you warm through 2 winters already. And you climb the narrow attic stairs. At the top is a small hatch. You push it open and step out onto the little railed platform the townspeople call a widow's walk. The wind is sharp up here, carrying the smell of low tide and distant pine from the mainland. You stand at the railing and look eastward, over the rooftops and chimneys, over the masts crowding the wharf, to the thin gray line where sea meets sky. You stay perfectly still, eyes searching every ripple, every dark shape on the horizon that might resolve itself into sails. Minutes pass, perhaps half an hour, until the sun lifts clear and the fishing boats begin to move in the harbor. Nothing today. You draw a slow breath, turn and go back down. The children are stirring now. You wake them gently, help the little ones dress, braid the older girl's hair while she chatters about school. Breakfast is eaten quietly at the scarred pine table. Bread, a little molasses, milk thinned with water. You remind them to mind their manners, to bring in kindling after lessons, to say their prayers. When they have gone, the house falls into its familiar hush. You wash the few dishes in cold water, sweep the floor with the same worn broom, then sit by the front window with your mending basket. There is always mending, stockings with heels worn through, shirts that must last another season, oilskin trousers kept ready for the day he walks through the door. Your needle moves in and out, in and out. The light shifts across the floorboards. From time to time you glance up at the empty street, at the other houses where other women are doing exactly the same things. You nod to them when you meet at the baker or the dry goods store. Exchange small pieces of news carried by the latest arrival from the Pacific grounds. Whose husband was seen in Honolulu looking well, whose ship was rumored full and homeward bound, whose name appeared on the melancholy list of the lost. No one speaks the deepest fear aloud, yet it hangs in every parlor like wood smoke that will not quite clear. Afternoons are for chores that never truly end. You beat rugs in the yard until your arms ache. Scrub floors on your knees. Tend the tiny vegetable patch that keeps potatoes and onions coming through the summer. You barter with neighbors, a jar of beach plum jam for a length of mending thread, a morning's help with laundry for a cupful of precious sugar. When the children return from school, you set them to their tasks. Then gather them around the table for lessons in ciphering and scripture. You read to them from the Bible by the light of a single tallow dip, telling them stories of their father's earlier voyages, of islands with breadfruit trees and flowers larger than dinner plates. Careful never to speak of the storms, the ice, the long empty weeks when no whale was seen. Evenings come early. You light the lamp only when the darkness presses too close, for oil is dear. You darn by firelight, the children's heads nodding over their primers. When they are tucked in, you sit alone a little longer. You take out the black dress folded carefully in tissue at the bottom of the cedar chest. Unfold it, run your hand along the seam you have let out and taken in again as your body changed with another child he has never seen. It is ready. You fold it once more, put it away, and climb the stairs to your cold bed. Some nights you leave the window cracked, even in winter, listening to the wind as it moves across the roof, wondering if the souls of drowned sailors ever find their way home on it. Month follows month. Seasons turn almost without notice. The children grow taller. Their shoes wear out faster than you can cobble new solace. You sell the silver spoons your mother gave you as a wedding gift. You take in sewing from the wealthier families farther up the hill. You learn to make a single salt cod feed 6 with potatoes and onions. And every single morning, no matter the weather, you climb those stairs again. You stand on the widow's walk, shawl drawn tight, eyes fixed on the empty horizon until the sun is fully up and the ordinary day must begin once more. This is the quiet, patient rhythm of a weir's wife waiting for a ship that may never return. A life measured not in grand events, but in small, repeated acts of hope and readiness. In the slow turning of calendars that blur together until one day you realize 3 years, almost 4, have slipped away like water through your fingers, and now, as we remain in these quiet coastal towns, let us linger a little longer with one particular story that has come down to us through the years. The story of a woman who waited and waited through circumstances more terrible than most. When you are ready, simply breathe softly, and I will continue. Thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join me for the rest of this journey. Let us stay in these same quiet towns for a little while longer, and allow one particular story to rise gently to the surface. The way a piece of driftwood appears after years beneath the waves. In November 1820, a 29-year-old whaling ship named Essex sailed out of Nantucket Harbor, bound for the distant grounds of the South Pacific. Among the 21 men and boys who waved goodbye from her deck was a young first mate named Owen Chase, newly married to a gentlewoman named Peggy. Peggy Chase stood on the wharf that cold morning, wrapped in the same wool cloak she would wear for years afterward. She watched the sails grow smaller, then disappear beyond the bar, and then she turned for home with the small, ordinary motions that would come to define the rest of her life. The first year passed the way the first year always passes. Letters arrived by other ships, brief, loving notes folded inside oil-stained canvas, telling of storms rounded Cape Horn, of islands visited, of whales seen but not yet taken. Peggy read them by the kitchen fire, traced the familiar handwriting with her finger, folded them again, and placed them in the cedar box on the mantel. The second year began to feel heavier, the flow of letters slowed, other ships came home full. Their captains spoke of meeting the Essex far out at the offshore ground, still hunting, still empty of oil. Peggy climbed the widow's walk each dawn as before, but now the children, a little boy and a baby girl born after Owen left, climbed with her sometimes, asking when Papa's ship would have enough black sails to come home. She answered softly that it would be soon, very soon, and carried them down again. By the third year, the town had begun to speak the ship's name in a different tone. 1,400 days was a long voyage, even by Nantucket standards. Still, Peggy kept the house exactly as Owen had left it. His shaving brush on the washstand, his spare boots by the door, his place at the table set each evening, even when there was barely enough food for the children. Then, in the summer of 1821, a battered brig limped into Nantucket with 5 gaunt survivors aboard. The story they told drifted through the streets like smoke. A huge whale had deliberately rammed the Essex twice, stove her in, and forced the crew into 3 small whaleboats in the middle of the Pacific, 3,000 miles from land. Of the 20 men who set out in those open boats, only 8 would ever see home again. Owen Chase was one of them, rescued after 93 days adrift, reduced almost to a skeleton, his mind shadowed by things he could never fully speak of afterward. Word reached Peggy on a warm August evening. A neighbor came to the door, hat in hand, unable to meet her eyes. Peggy stood very still in the doorway, one hand on the frame, listening as the man told her that her husband was alive. Alive, but not yet home, recovering in Valparaiso, too weak to travel for many months more. For the first time in 3.5 years, she did not climb the widow's walk the next morning. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table long after the children had gone to school, staring at the empty chair opposite her. Alive. The word should have brought joy, but it arrived tangled with images she could not push away. The vast, empty ocean, the tiny boats, the slow wasting of strong men into shadows. Owen finally came home in June 1822, carried ashore on a litter because his legs would not hold him. Peggy met the cart at the end of the lane. She looked once at the man they lowered to the ground, sunburned almost beyond recognition, eyes sunken, beard wild, and then she simply opened her arms. He wept against her shoulder like a child, whispering her name over and over. The reunion the town expected never quite happened. Owen could not bear the sight of the sea. He flinched at the cry of gulls. At night he woke shouting about water, water everywhere and not a drop to drink. He wrote his account of the voyage in a hurried, trembling hand, as though setting the words on paper might cage the memories, then locked the manuscript away and rarely spoke of it again. Peggy nursed him patiently, spooning broth between his cracked lips, changing the sheets when the nightmares left him drenched in sweat. She still climbed the widow's walk every dawn, but now it was to watch the sunrise alone, to give Owen the quiet he needed below. She bore him another child the following year, a daughter he named Phoebe Ann after his lost sister, and she smiled when he held the baby, though her own smiles had grown thin and careful. Years passed in that same small house. Owen took work as a night watchman on shore, walking the streets after dark because sleep still eluded him. Peggy kept the black dress folded in the cedar chest, no longer quite so ready yet never quite put away either. She aged quickly. Friends said the waiting had used her up long before the homecoming. In 1837, 15 years after his return, Owen suffered a breakdown and was confined briefly to an asylum in Boston. Peggy visited him there every week, bringing clean shirts and the little things that reminded him of home. When he came back, he was quieter than ever, content to sit by the fire carving tiny whaleboats from scraps of whalebone, boats he never finished. Peggy herself began to slip in the years that followed. She would stand at the window for hours gazing at nothing, or climb the widow's walk in the rain without a shawl. Neighbors found her once at low tide, walking far out on the flats still searching the horizon, calling Owen's name though he sat safe inside. The doctor spoke gently of nervous prostration, of a mind worn thin by too many years of watching and waiting. She died in 1846 at the age of 51, quietly in the same bed where she had lain alone for so long. Owen outlived her by 23 years, carrying her miniature portrait in a pocket until the day he died. And so one woman's waiting longer and more terrible than most came at last to its gentle end, leaving only the quiet house, the widow's walk open to the wind, and the endless rhythm of the sea that never quite let her go. Now let us leave Peggy's small parlor for a little while, and walk slowly through the streets of these old towns, noticing the little railed platforms high on the rooftops that still stand exactly as they were left so many years ago. Whenever you feel ready, simply settle a little deeper, and I will continue. If you've enjoyed this story, do hit the like and subscribe button for more content just like this. Thanks for listening. Now let's continue. Let us now walk slowly through the older parts of Nantucket, New Bedford, or any of the quiet streets that once looked out toward the Whaling Grounds. Streets where time seems to have paused and taken a breath. Notice the rooftops. Almost every captain's house, every substantial home built between 1820 and 1860 carries the same small, distinctive feature, a narrow railed platform perched high under the eaves, reached by a hatch or a steep set of stairs inside the attic. The townspeople still call them widows' walks, though few remember exactly why. From the street they look like little more than decorative afterthoughts, square balconies no wider than a kitchen table, ringed by a simple wooden railing painted white or gray to match the shingles. Up close the planks are silvered by salt air, worn smooth in the center by generations of feet that stood in the same spot day after day. The railing is often no higher than your waist. The floorboards have warped slightly from a century of rain and snow blowing sideways across the roof. There is usually a small ship's bell or a weathered flagstaff that has not flown a flag in living memory. If you climb the stairs inside past the low-ceilinged attic where sea chests and spare spars are stored, you push open the hatch and step out into the wind. From here the view is unbroken, the harbor, the bar, the long curve of the Atlantic stretching away until it bends out of sight. On a clear day you can see 20 miles or more, far enough to catch the top gallants of an incoming ship hours before she raises her hull. These platforms were built for watching, nothing else. Carpenter's records from the 1840s and 1850s show line items for roof walk or observatory added to nearly every new house of any size. They were practical at first, a place for the captain himself to pace while waiting for his own vessel to be fitted out, or to judge the weather before sailing. But within a decade, the purpose had quietly shifted. The men were gone, and the women took their place on the roofs. Many of the walks still stand exactly as they were left. In Nantucket alone, more than 200 survive, some on houses that have passed through dozens of owners who never knew what the little platform was for. The railings bear faint scratches where spyglasses were rested, pale patches where shawls brushed against the paint season after season. In a few, you can still see the shallow grooves worn into the floorboards by the same pair of boots standing in the exact same spot, morning after morning, year after year. Walk along Orange Street or Fair Street, early in the morning, and you can almost feel the accumulated weight of all those patient vigils. The town is quiet now. The great try-works that once belched smoke day and night were torn down long ago. Yet the widow's walks remain, silent witnesses to a time when the most important room in the house was a few square feet of open sky. Some of the old attics still hold the things the women left behind when the watching finally ended. A cracked spyglass with a name scratched on the barrel. A child's wooden whale worn smooth from being carried up and down the stairs. A single page of a letter water-stained and brittle, beginning "My dearest wife," and ending mid-sentence because the ship that carried it never reached port. Archaeologists and historians have begun to study these spaces the way they once studied hearths or cellar holes. They measure the wear patterns on the planks. Note the direction every platform faces, always southeast, toward the deep water grounds. They find tiny offerings tucked into corners, a mother-of-pearl button, a whalebone fid, a lock of hair tied with faded ribbon. Small, private altars to hope. Even the paint tells a story. Layer upon layer of white lid paint applied every few years to protect the wood from the salt wind. When conservators carefully scrape back the top coats on the oldest walks, they find thin, dark streaks near the bottom smudges from the hem of a black dress, brushed against wet paint on a morning when the watching had turned to mourning. Today, if you visit on a foggy November dawn, the town feels emptied of its purpose. The harbors that once held 400 whale ships now rock a handful of pleasure yachts. Yet the widow's walks remain, perfectly preserved by the same salt air that aged them. No one uses them anymore, except perhaps a painter setting up an easel or a tourist taking a photograph. The hatches are often nailed shut. The stairs have been removed to make more closet space. But the little platforms endure, railed squares of sky where generations of women stood wrapped in shawls, eyes fixed on an horizon that almost never answered. And if you stand beneath one at dusk when the gulls are coming in to roost and the light is turning the color of whale oil, you can almost hear the faint creak of a hatch opening somewhere high above, the soft scrape of a shoe on weathered planking, the quiet, patient intake of breath that preceded another long night of waiting. Now, let us descend from these rooftops, cross the narrow lanes, and step inside one of the substantial brick counting houses that still line the lower end of Main Street, where a very different rhythm of life carried on while the women watched from above. Whenever you feel ready, simply let your shoulders soften a little more. Let us now cross the narrow lane and step through a heavy paneled door into one of the substantial brick counting houses that still stand at the lower end of Main Street. These buildings have changed very little since the 1850s. Inside, the air is warm and smells faintly of lamp oil, ink, and beeswax. A coal fire burns steadily in a black iron stove, taking the dampness from the room. The windows are tall and many-paned, looking out onto the wharves where the great ships once loaded casks shoulder to shoulder. Rows of high desks line the walls, each with its slanted top, its brass inkstand, its neat stacks of ledgers bound in maroon leather. A large table in the center is covered with charts of the Pacific Ocean, the coasts marked in careful ink offshore ground, on the line, Japan grounds, northwest coast. These are places the wives at home can only imagine as colored patches on a map. This is where the owners and agents of the whaling fleet spent their days. They arrived at 9, hung their beaver hats and greatcoats on the same row of pegs, greeted one another with quiet nods, and settled into the familiar rhythm of commerce. One man opens the day's mail packets carried by the latest arrival, breaking the wax seals with a silver knife, spreading letters across the table like cards. Another dips his pen and begins the slow, satisfying work of entering barrels of oil into the ledger. 180 sperm, 1,200 whale, 800 bone. Each number represents a fortune. The counting house is never hurried. There is time to lean back in a Windsor chair, warm boots stretched toward the stove, and discuss the season's prospects. Which ships are reported full? Which captains are judged steady, which too fond of rum in the Sandwich Islands? Which new vessels will be launched in the spring, their keels already laid in the shipyard across the water? At noon, a boy brings a tray from the tavern, chowder thick with pilot bread, apple dowdy, hot coffee in thick china cups. No one ever speaks of the empty horizon the women watch from the rooftops. Here, the sea is only numbers on a page, risks calculated and underwritten. Afternoons are for visits from chandlers and sailmakers, for quiet conferences in the back office where contracts are signed and shares divided. A ship is owned in 64ths or 30-seconds. A widow might hold 2 shares inherited from her father, a clergyman 1/32nd for his charity fund. The owners themselves rarely hold more than an eighth or a quarter, enough to live very comfortably indeed. Their houses stand farther up Orange Street or on the Cliff Road, wide, gracious homes with piazzas and formal gardens, warmed by multiple fireplaces, lit by whale oil lamps with cut glass pendants. When the light begins to fade, the ledgers are closed and locked in iron safes. The men pull on their coats, tip their hats, and walk home through streets already growing quiet. They dine at tables set with silver and Nantucket china, served by maids who were once whalers' daughters themselves. Children recite lessons learned at private academies. Wives wear silk dresses ordered from Boston, pearl combs in their smoothly parted hair. After dinner, there might be music in the parlor, or a hand of whist, or a new novel read aloud by the fire. These men sometimes stood on the same widows' walks before they owned ships, when they were only captain's clerks or young second mates. They remember the cold mornings, the ache of watching. But memory softens with distance and warmth. The risks they take now are measured in columns of figures, not in years away from home. A ship lost is a line struck through in red ink, an insurance claim filed, a new vessel ordered before the next season. And yet, even here, the sea finds ways to remind them. A letter arrives describing a captain gone mad in the Arctic ice. A cask washed ashore on the Azores bears the brand of a ship 3 years overdue. On certain foggy evenings, the distant bell buoy tolls like a funeral knell, and for a moment the warm room feels less certain. But the stove crackles, the lamp glows steady, and the moment passes. The ledger is balanced. The risk, after all, has been shared among many. So the days turn in the counting house, calm and orderly, while a few streets away women still climb narrow stairs to stand on small railed platforms open to the wind. 2 worlds in the same small town, divided by little more than the width of a shingled roof, yet separated by everything that distance and money and the slow turning of the sea can create. And now, as the fire in the kamiha stove burns low, let us slowly find our way back to the present, to the quiet room where you are listening, warm and safe and surrounded by the gentle certainties of tonight. Whenever you feel ready, simply breathe a little more deeply, and now let the counting house door close gently behind us. Let the crackle of that warm stove fade into the distance, and find ourselves back in the quiet room where you began. Safe, warm, the covers tucked close. All those years of watching and waiting, of empty horizons and folded black dresses, of ledgers balanced in warm offices while women stood in the wind. They belong to another time now. The ships no longer sail for whales. The trypots are cold. The widow's walks stand empty under the same stars that once watched over so much patient hope. Let everything else drift away like a ship slipping quietly over the horizon. Farther, farther, until even its memory is only a faint line of white against the sky. There is nothing more to watch for, nothing more to wait for, only the soft darkness, the warmth of your bed, and the deep, unhurried peace that has been waiting for you all along. Breathe in, slowly. Breathe out, even more slowly. And when you are ready, simply let yourself go. Good night. Sleep well.